So we're learning that the Trump administration is now planning to partially fund SNAP after a pair of judges ruled that the administration is required to keep the food aid running. So what does this mean? We don't really know yet. So this just happened at, about an hour ago. So President Trump has been ordered by a judge in Rhode Island to use contingency funds to continue SNAP benefits. The judge says he had until midday today to make his funding decision. ABC's Stephen Portnoy gave us a little background on Utah's morning news this morning.
The bottom line is the judge says that SNAP is an entitlement and that failure to pay it out amounts to an irreparable harm for tens of millions of people in the country. Now, the administration has viewed this in this way. Look, we're in the middle of a shutdown. There is no money on the table for any program. And even though, yes, Congress had in the past authorized about $5 to $6 billion in contingency funds, we can no longer access that money because the program has been suspended because we're in the shutdown. Well, that's a difference from what the administration initially said prior to the shutdown and in its earliest days, in which it put in writing that it would rely on this contingency fund to provide benefits.
So it's the contingency fund is about $5 billion, and the monthly outgoing funds, I guess, from the federal government to the SNAP program is typically $8 billion. So what they're expecting is about half of the payments that SNAP recipients get. That's what they would get for the month of November. There's no plan for December at this point.
Right, because that emergency fund is like essentially a 1 month reserve that says we can go do this, which, does carry you pretty much into early December at this point. So,
although the question is, how is this going to work? And nobody knows. That's the question. Nobody knows.
Once again, the answer is the best thing to do is reopen the federal government and get things running the way they're supposed to run again. Yeah. But in lieu of that, at least you're getting some relief. And you're seeing, I think you're seeing, at least here in Utah, people being fairly generous, donating to the food pantry. And we've got some of that going on in coordination with Election Day and people potentially going to the polls or at least to drop off their ballots. You have from the state side, they've essentially spent some money to help cover a little bit of this.
Up to $4 million for food banks.
Which is not the full thing or anything there, but now if you get a little relief from the federal side, if anything, it's kind of a recognition that there are people who need help, and if there's a way that we can do this, let's find a way to take care of them and not use people as leverage. Yes,
and I think that's one of the big issues, right? Is using people as leverage. So, look, one of the unknowns is how long will it take from saying, okay, we will use these contingency funds for people who receive these benefits to actually see the money show up on their cards. And the answer is they really don't know, that it could take up to 2 weeks plus to be able to get that to get to the people who actually need it. So their funds were cut off November 1st, which was Saturday, and it may be till the middle of November before they actually see half of their benefits restored.
Which is better than the situation you were in before, if you're in that situation.
Half is better than zero.
Yes, but it goes to point out the fact that while we talk about a government shutdown and a government reopening, it's not always just as easy as flipping on the light switch and flipping it off. Some things take a little while to get going again.
Yeah, that's right. And, you said something to me during the break, which is worth a longer conversation probably than we have today. But I think one of the questions that a lot of people have is, why are 1 in 8 Americans receiving food assistance? And I think that why is the United States of America, why do we have so many poor people in our nation, right, that need that help? And we know that a lot of SNAP recipients actually do work, but they're considered the working poor. I know that when I volunteered with the local food pantry in my area, that is mostly who we saw. It was people who were the working poor who had jobs, but they either had an unexpected expense or they had high housing costs or whatever it was, and they needed help with food.
Yeah, and this has been a lot of the discussion, even going back to some of the work that was being done with Doge, if you remember that. It feels like ages ago, but it wasn't that many months ago. That when it comes to welfare programs, it's there in any program there's going to exist some waste and some fraud, and you want to eliminate as much of that as you can to make sure that the people who are supposed to receive the help from the program do receive it. And I think that you can actually be very compassionate, and you can also be very diligent in rooting out waste and fraud at the same time. If you understand that our efforts here are not to punish people who are poor. It's to make sure that the funds that we have allocated for this go to the people who actually need it. And it's not going to people who are saying, hey, look at this, I'm getting the food, but I'm also spending that allows me to spend my money on this, this, and this that are less than necessities.
Right.
And it probably drives from like, you want people to have sort of an inherent sense of, I want to do pretty much anything I can to avoid being on the public dole. And if I have to go on, I want to be on for as short amount of time as possible. That's how we hope it works for everybody. Yeah. But I think no one's naive enough to think that that's how it works across the board for everyone. Right.
And, some of the numbers that I've seen show that the waste, fraud, and abuse that are within the SNAP program it's runs somewhere around 1% to 3%, which it still exists, but it's the lowest of any of the federal programs that they've looked at. So there's that, right? So there's a little bit of good news. We've got some judges saying, no, you're going to use these contingency funds. But at the same time, so President Trump went on 60 Minutes over the weekend, and they recorded, it wasn't a live show, right? So I think some of the things I read is that he was on there. They ended up using like 30% or something because he can be a talker. But one of the things that he said on there is he's not going to be extorted by Democrats to reopen the government, and said he has no plans to negotiate as the government shutdown is now in its 6th week. So that's one of the issues, right? Is he's like, well, I'm not coming to the table.
Yeah.
And to John Curtis's point, Senator Curtis, he's like, he doesn't really actually have a vote. We're the ones who have the vote. So we were talking about how this impacts people here in the state of Utah, and we had a conversation, remember, about Shane Stewart. He talked to us. He's a certified financial planner, and we asked him to share advice for those worried about the government shutdown. And his number one piece of advice was, don't panic.
One is to not panic. Panic isn't probably necessary, at least yet right now. I know it's a little unnerving to learn that you're not getting the source of income that you're used to, but you likely will get it. It's just going to be delayed. However, in the meantime, be resourceful. Reach out to state and local and even charitable organizations to see if they can help you bridge the gap. Many of these are already aware that SNAP benefits are delayed, and so they're already reaching out. State agencies and even charitable organizations are reaching out, and so go find them and see what you can do to get that stream of income temporarily covered.
And he says there's a light at the end of the tunnel. The shutdown simply won't go on forever, although it might feel like that right now.
Yeah. These SNAP benefits being delayed should be a temporary issue, and the reason being is because those that make decisions also understand this is not only a human issue, it's also an economic issue. If we go more than a couple of months of delayed SNAP benefits, it starts to impact the economy because those benefits turn into the grocery stores and the people who provide the food and those kind of things. It'll start to impact the economy, and we really can't afford that as a nation either. And so they're going to have to come up with a solution, an agreement, start making it less political and more human.
The less political part, right? I don't know about that.
That seems like a high bar to clear at this point.
It does. So he was right, though. There are a lot of ways, especially in Utah, and I think it's one of the things that Utah does so well, right, is we step up when our friends and neighbors have need. So we talked, we've already mentioned a couple of times, we'll talk about it more. Food donation barrels are going to be at least 4 different polling locations across Utah County during Election Day tomorrow. We're going to tell you how a simple stop at the ballot box could help feed a neighbor in need, and also what you can do more generally on Election Day and other days as well to help our neighbors. Stay with us. Tomorrow's election is not just about casting votes, which it is about, please do that, but it's also a chance to give back. So there are 4 different food drives that we know of being held this Tuesday, corresponding with polling locations in American Fork, Pleasant Grove, Provo, and Vineyard. But I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe some pop-up donations, right?
Yeah, I mean, you think that there's one thing that's on the public consciousness right now. It's like, hey, we need to help some people out.
Yeah.
And if I'm going somewhere to drop off a ballot and there's somewhere I can go drop off.
Yeah, if there's a big bin right there,
whatever,
yeah. I would.
If you make it easy, I think you'll
absolutely
make it much more successful of a food drive. So this seems to be like a nice thing to do where, hey, if you haven't mailed in your ballot yet, you got to go drop it off somewhere. grab some stuff out of the pantry that you can spare and
That's right.
do that.
On Friday, which was Halloween, we had a couple of houses they're very popular in their neighborhoods, and people go to see them, and they were collecting food for the Utah Food Bank as well, right?
Yeah.
So we know that that's happening out there. According to Jessica,
I can certainly send the food bank some Snickers bars right now.
please do that. They need that, right? Yeah. They need that. I remember when I was volunteering down at Tabitha's Way, one of the things they were looking for were they called them birthday kits. So that as families came through, if they had somebody with a birthday in their family that month, they could get a little bag that had I think it had a couple of balloons and a cake mix and a frosting mix thing and some candles, right? Because you think those are some of the things that are maybe not necessities, but are ones that can really make a difference in somebody's life.
Yeah, it's important to think about not just the most essential thing, but sort of beyond.
So if you have to make a choice, you're going to go for the most essential, right? But birthday cakes can be a really nice thing.
Yeah, and it also is helpful just in the sense that sometimes you don't get to see the need. Whether there may be people in your neighborhood who don't tell you about the need.
That's exactly right.
And you might be in a neighborhood where you think, oh, everyone here's doing fine, and I'd love to help somehow, but I don't have those people in my circle who I know need help. So this is a way to go do it.
It's, according to Jessica Miller, she's the Chief Impact Officer for Community Action Services and Food Bank, that up to 11,000 families in Utah County have been impacted by the SNAP shutdown. And the food bank expects to see an increase in daily demand of more than 5,000 pounds of food. But to your point, I have to add this. When I was volunteering at the food pantry, one of the things that they did is they would have, groups of youth maybe come in, or a family even come in and say, okay, we're going to volunteer. But there's always some kind of a pre-volunteer educational piece about why food insecurity and hunger are an issue in our community. And what they said is the numbers in Utah County, it was 1 in 5 are food insecure. And it's people that you go to school with. So one of my neighbors was one of the co-founders of this Northern Utah one. And he said one of the things that really opened his eyes was somebody that they were attending our church congregation. And he just happened one time to ask this young man, how are you doing? How are things going for you? And the young man told him he had a job, but it was not full time, and he was fishing in our local retention pond. And if he caught a fish, he would eat that day, and if he didn't catch a fish, he wouldn't eat. And that spurred my friend, who's Mike Carter, to say, this is a larger problem that goes invisible sometimes. So it's not just SNAP, right? It's like we mentioned before, it could be the working poor or whatever, but it is out there. And I think one of the conversations it's good to have with our families is, even if we're not struggling with food insecurity, that they definitely have people that they know that are, and they may not know that they are.
Yeah. Well, and then there's, there might be folks who, sometimes there's a little bit of just personal pride that goes into it. And we talked about that a little bit on the flip side, saying, you should, if you need assistance, your goal should be to quickly get to where you don't need assistance. And we hope that's how people treat it. But that can also be a situation where people need assistance, but they either don't know how to go get those resources or they just don't want to. Right. And I mean, I remember my first television job was in Topeka, Kansas, and I had a nice 3-year TV contract, an insane contract to sign as I think about it. But, I had a 3-year deal and some stability there. Yeah. And then the only thing they could have done that would have changed that was shut the station down. They essentially, didn't fold, but sort of shut all local programming down. And I remember at that time, thinking oh, well, I'm 23 or something like that, years old, 24, and newlywed. And I was I remember asking my dad, well, I don't even know, what am I supposed to do? And he's like, well, you've been paying into these, so if you need to, you can go file for unemployment and you can go get some help. This is sort of a different, but at least somewhat similar situation. And I remember thinking, I don't want to do that. Right. I want to just go get the next job. And I was able to find one before it became a real issue. But I remember thinking that was one of those situations no, I don't want to go do that. I want to figure this out.
I think that's common. We know that there's dignity in work, and I do think that's common. And I think with the food bank and the food pantry, sometimes they see people who, I remember doing intake one time on a woman who was a nurse, but they'd had an unexpected expense, and it was, it had drained their budget, and she was sobbing because she did not want to be there, right? But she just needed the food. She just
Yeah.
desperately needed it. And we're there. We wanted to help, right? Of course.